Thank you very much, Jim. And I did want to mention, too, that we are keeping the presentations a little bit brief, so we'll have an opportunity for an interactive Q&A session at the end of this as well. Okay, Darin, if you can perhaps bring it down to the Ontario/regional level for us, please.
Excellent. If we can just bring up the slide presentation, that'd be great. Excellent. So we're going to talk about the need for speed today, and without question, if you don't have speed, you don't have anything. It's as simple as that. There's economic factors that indicate around the world that the growth of your region, your community, is going to be limited by the speed you have, period. And so speed's really important. So we're going to talk a lot about that from an Orion perspective, but also the communities that we're working with and what we're seeing and how we can help them grow their capabilities. So if we can get up the next slide, that'd be great. Orion is one of the world's fastest research and education networks. We operate at 1 gigabit per second. 100 gigabits per second. Thanks. 100 gigabits per second. That means you can download 3 of your favorite movies in 1 second. We did that upgrade over the last year. Thank you, Canary. Appreciate that. We operate that. Oh, you can do the next slide. That'd be great. That's our network that we operated over 6,000 kilometers of optical fiber across Ontario. We've got points of presence, or POPs, in major cities along the way. We have over 30 of them in support of our regional initiatives, and that's the connectivity of our universities, colleges, research hospitals. About 70% of the enrollment of school boards in Ontario connected to the network. That means 2 million people use our network every single day, and they probably don't even know it, except when it goes down, of course. It's like the light switch, right? The light switch doesn't go on, you know there's a problem. We also connect, without question, internationally through Canary, across Canada through Canary to our other partners, which are mentioned today, Cybera and BC Net, and Nova Scotia is represented here, and RISC as well, since we're in Montreal, for Quebec. So collectively, we are that backbone of innovation across Canada, not just connecting researchers, but connecting communities. Next slide. So we are a self-sustaining not-for-profit company. We have been around for 10 years, no government funding for the last 5 years. Again, 6,000 kilometers in over 30 communities, which is a really important perspective. Again, one of the interesting things that came out of it is, out of an original investment of $35 million made 10 years ago by the Ontario government, we contribute over $140 million directly and indirectly to the GDP of Ontario. That's a huge impact over 10 years. That's a 30-to-1 ratio over 10 years. And our infrastructure is good for at least another 10. So investing in the bandwidth, without question, has a huge economic impact, period. And the faster it goes, the better. We've got one of the fastest in the world. We expect to run out of that capacity in 5 years. We're already testing by the end of this year 400 gigabits per second. Probably a terabit per second next year. So that's what we've got to do. We've got to set the stage for our researchers and our students and our communities so that we can interconnect them to help them grow. So that's what we're up to. Next slide, please. No question, we connect with all the major telcos. We connect with all the major IT vendors and our member institutions, over 100 of them, and again, our users. One of the really important aspects to this is that we also work and connect with regional players that are throughout the province. We're dealing with about 7 organizations on a regional level right now. I visited over 20 leaders in the communities throughout Ontario and seeing what their plans are, but we're working with 7, all the way from well-established organizations, all to those that are saying, here's our dream, how do we do it? And we're looking to help them make that dream a fulfillment. Next slide. Some big things that are happening that we're doing. Jim mentioned some things that are going on in the network. It's just the network, but what's happening over top of it? All the way to Niagara region monitoring vineyards. So they've got a GPS sensor on every single vine. Not that the vine moves, but the sensor is for determining weather and that location. So micro weather at a plant level, and what's the soil, what's going on in the soil, and how do you collect that data to find out what's happening in your vineyard. High definition streaming of video across the world so that it's like real live television going on between New Zealand and Australia and Canada. Huge international consortium on antivirals, the SARS initiative. There was over 300 organizations and researchers working on the Orion network connected through Canary internationally to help solve that problem. Again, 10% of the traffic on the God particle occurred over Orion and Canary in the world. 10% of it because of the research that was going on. Next slide. And we got lots of big ideas. We call them big ideas that are going on all over the place. And here's just some simple examples of what's happening on the capability, on research from students and other countries working with us closely and trying to create a collaborative environment. Next slide. So what I want to talk about in the rest of my presentation are the 6 C's. I believe that innovation doesn't occur at a country level. We talked about Canada sliding down to 32. I actually believe that innovation occurs at a community level, a regional level first. And that's where it really matters because a region knows what's going on there. That's where the economic factors are occurring. We've got intelligent cities, over 100 of them. That's why you measure them at a city level. There was a list that just came out last week, actually, of what are the most innovative economic cities in the world, the top 100. Canada has 5 of them. That's pretty powerful at a regional level. We just talked about Richard, Florida. The world is spiky. It's about regions. It's not about being flat across a country. So what matters is the people sitting around this room is the cities and how do we support them. So there are 6 things I want to talk about. We'll talk about from our perspective on growth of your business plan of creating an intelligent city. The 6 factors are, the first one is cycles. Get the next slide. That's great. So computer cycles. Computer cycles are absolutely driving the need. Whether you've got a huge supercomputer in your financial district in your region or your research supercomputer, whether you've got it there or you've got people who need supercomputing, like Jim says, somewhere else in the country that's got this capability, how do we put it on the network? Growth in ideas are going to need huge computing capability and the cycles. And we've got to have a way to connect to them. So that's one of the factors. Next factor is centers, data. Data is huge, data centers. We talked about Robin talked about the square kilometer array, 1 petabyte per second. Okay, so how big is that? That means in one day, you've got a 1 with 19 zeros behind it. That's the amount of data that's being generated in a day. Now imagine trying to store that. Imagine trying to distribute that and access it from researchers around Canada to make a difference, to look at that data to see what you can do with it. Phenomenal. Imagine cancer research, genomic research, Brain Institute research, all of that's happening. Huge amounts of visual data that's occurring and sharing that amongst our researchers and companies that want to use that to help economic growth. Huge impact. So you got to consider the data center aspect. Next slide, please. So connectivity, without question. I just already alluded to it. Speed is everything. You've got to have that speed. And from our perspective, we're positioned from an Ontario perspective, but we're helping others in the regions grow. We're working, as I said, with a couple of proposals. We just put in one major proposal for a region that's looking to upgrade their connectivity to 100 gigabits per second because they know it's got to happen. Without it, we're dealing with some major research centers, and they're talking 10 gigabits right now, looking within the next 2 years to go 100 gigabits per second. Imagine what that means with respect of putting fiber in the ground. How do you access it? How do you manage it? All of that. That's a really important factor for you to consider. Next slide. Collaboration. You can't do it alone. Everyone has their own little silos. We all love to live in our silos, in our bureaucratic silos, and do all those things within our city, within our region. Cities not talking to each other within a region, not talking to each other within a province, not talking to each other within Canada. We've got to get rid of all that. There isn't enough money to go around. We've got to talk about collaboration. How can we leverage what we have to work with what you have so that we can have a positive sum game in this? Not a zero-sum game, a positive sum game. That's what we've got to do. Next slide. So cloud, there's no question. We're trying to reach out and everything's in the cloud, right? No question, the world is going to cloud. If you're not going to cloud or not thinking about it, you're behind. Even the House of Lords in London is doing cloud. Every lord now has an iPad, and they don't get stacks of paper anymore. They've got a device, an iPad, and they're using it, and they can even bring their own device to work. That's kind of cool. and access that network. So you've got to have cloud in supporting somewhere, whether it's in your region or outside your region. You've got to be able to support it. Again, that means more connectivity. And there's no hands down. Cost of cloud, managing, decision making, all that stuff, without question, is the right way to go. Reliability is important. Connectivity, all those things, got to make sure they're in place. But that's the way to go. Next slide. The last slide is the challenges slide. Last mile availability. So, look at Orion. We've got this wonderful network. We've got 30 locations. How do you connect to those locations to take advantage of that? We connect to Canary. We help connect to the rest of the world. But how do you get the last mile, as we call it, whether it's wireless or your own fiber or leased lines? That's a really important factor. And where do you build the right centers within your region so you can get short distances for everybody to help reduce those connection costs? You really got to sit down and talk about real user requirements. You can't just say, build it and they will come. That'll happen, but let me tell you, you really have a solid business plan. They talk about intelligent cities. The intelligent cities now are economically more above the scale of everyone else. I think they're intelligent cities because they put the right business plan together and they followed that business plan, and because of that, they've gotten more money economically, et cetera. Make sure your users are involved in that business plan, not just bureaucrats. Linking research and commercial innovation. It talks about starting in universities where the ideas, and colleges where the ideas come. How do you link them through our networks, through other networks, to bring them to industry in very innovative, novel ways? That helps them, those companies, grow from their next perspective. They can't think of all what's happening next themselves. Those institutions can help them. Cost. Every second we wait, the cost goes up. Orion was put in place, 6,000 kilometers of optical fiber 10 years ago for $35 million. We just did a study for a region, one of the fastest growing regions in Canada, for 120 kilometers of optical fiber at $17 million. That means the cost is now 30 times more in 10 years. You think telecommunications costs are coming down? They're not. The barrier of entry is getting bigger. Every minute you wait is a minute lost of economic growth. Legacy systems. Huge legacy systems, and we've got to support what's going on there. And you've got to help those that have got older systems. How do they get onto the newer systems? Because they will drag you down. And you've got to look at that as a huge challenge. And again, it's not just about what goes on in your region connectivity, because it's not internet inside your region, it's internet outside. How do you connect to the rest of the world and bring those ideas to play? So that's the final challenge. So don't just think about yourself, it's yourself in the rest of the world. Last slide. And I think that's probably it. Thank you. I'm finished.